In tonight's virtual event, we will tackle one of the biggest questions in art, which is superior, classical or contemporary art? Now, call me naive, but I honestly did not know there was such a divide. Before we kick off tonight's event, we're going to start with a poll to see where you stand. So which art do you think is superior, classical or contemporary? When you hear Michelangelo, do you think of the sculptor or the Ninja Turtle? We'll then see if our debaters can change your mind. So get in quick, start voting now. Oh, look at that. Classical is 42%, contemporary 17%. I'm going to make note of that. So classical, 42%, contemporary 17%. All right. Got our work cut out for us. We'll see. We've all come with our own cherished opinions, of course, on which art would win your vote. But let's introduce you to our two esteemed speakers. Let's see if they can persuade you otherwise over the course of the evening. Arguing for the side of classical art is Mary McGillivray. Mary is an art historian, a video essayist and the brains behind the viral TikTok account, The Iconoclast, which has over 340,000 followers and over 7 million likes. Mary is a big believer that art history is just old memes. And she's covered everything on her TikTok, from debunking the Eurovision drug sniffing scandal using her degree in Renaissance art to rating art history's biggest himbos. Please welcome to your screens, Mary, the art killer McGillivray.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Aimon.
Just out of interest too, Mary, who was art history's biggest himbo?
Art history's biggest himbo, I decided with my, qualifications in making this decision on behalf of everyone, was every picture of Saint Sebastian painted during the Renaissance. If you don't know, you don't know. And if you know, you know. That's all I'll say.
Okay, well, thank you for making that tough decision on behalf of all of us. Arguing for the side of contemporary art is Dr. Louise R. Mayhew. Louise is an art historian, a social activist, and animal lover. She champions art that challenges the idea of the great male genius, because let's be real, they've had the spotlight for way too long. You may recognize Louise as the host of QAGOMA's popular Confronting Contemporary Art talk series, where she demystifies contemporary art and explores the important topics like, why is everyone nude? And my children could have done that. Please welcome to your screens, Dr. Louise Mayhew, Dr. Mayhem.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, Aimon.
And why is everyone nude?
Why not?
That's a perfect answer.
Oh, come on. I mean, nudity goes back as far as art history goes back. It's a fantastic excuse to take our clothes off and to revel in looking at other bodies.
Good answer. All right. Let's get ready for this battle royale, people. Let's give you a quick snapshot of how tonight's debate will run. For the purposes of the debate, we are defining classical art as anything made from the 1400s to the early 1900s, and contemporary art as anything made from the 1970s onwards. Yes, we know these classifications are not official or universal. We are just using them for this very non-binding debate. The debate will span 2 rounds where our guests will try and win over your hearts and minds. Round 1 is all about winning over your heart. What hits you right in the feels? Is it beautiful? Is it nice? Is it different? Is it unusual? And round 2 is all about the mind. What concepts are at play? This is the section that's really just about art. Like, is the technique mind-blowing? What impact does it have on society? So round 1 is heart. Round 2, mind. Unfortunately, we had to scrap the other 4 rounds on Earth, Fire, Wind, and Water. So we will not be summoning Captain Planet tonight. I'm sorry to all the Planeteers out there. And after 2 rounds, Mary and Louise will have a chance to have their mic drop moment with the closing arguments in a final attempt to sway you. Oh, thank you, Obama. I brought my own little prop mic so I can symbolically drop it. And then you, the audience, via on screen, will decide once and for all which art is superior, classical or contemporary. So let's get started. Arguing for the side of classical art and its superior ability to win over your heart is Mary McGillivray. Take it away, Mary.
Thank you, Aimon. Thank you. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which I work and live, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are part of the oldest continuing culture on Earth. And I'd like to pay my respects to any First Nations elders who may be watching this evening. Now let's get into it. I'm here to try to convince you that the aesthetics and emotions found in classical European art, as seen in the European Masterpieces exhibition at QAGOMA this year, have a greater effect on the heart than contemporary art. Now, I know what you're thinking. This first image that I'm going to show you is not the most impressive painting I could have chosen from the European Masterpieces exhibition as the headliner for my argument. I could have begun with a much far grander, more extravagant painting, but I want to begin with this very unassuming portrait because I believe that when it comes to art, it's often the more subtle things that have the biggest emotional impact. So who is this dork? Well, this is Benedict Von Hertzenstein. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but I hope I am, at about 22 years of age. Now, Benedict was the son of the mayor of Lucerne, which is a small town in Switzerland. Back in his era, it was quite a large town. This portrait was painted by Hans Holbein, who was about 20 years old at the time also when he painted this picture. Holbein is famous for being the master of capturing the faces of his sitters in a captivatingly subtle way. There's some amazing line drawings that he drew, sketches of people that just really feel like you're looking at the face of someone that you could know and see in the street today. His expressions, his facial expressions are so complex and personal, you really feel like you're getting to know the person in his paintings. This portrait is very formally posed. It's very traditional. It's what you'd expect. It's very upright. But Benedict's face is full of this subtle trepidation. It's kind of like his face doesn't quite match his body in some ways. I think that this is a really interesting portrait because it feels like he might be playing the part of a proud son from a powerful family, but we're not quite sure that he really believes it. It's even more moving once we learn that Benedict died only 5 years after this was painted in battle. It's a beautiful example of how history connects us with our shared humanity and how art from history is a visual connection to that humanity. It really gets me emotional to think about this young man who lived 500 years ago, that's so long ago, and died in battle before he even turned 30. But it's also very touching that he wanted to have his portrait painted so that he could declare, as it says in the text in the top left corner, "When I looked like this, I was 22 years old." I find that so touching. But let's move on to something a little less subtle and a lot less melancholy. When it comes to drama and emotions in art, Caravaggio is the master, and it's something that has made him one of history's most famous and popular artists to date. I'm sure you've all heard of him. You probably are familiar with some of his paintings. There's a lot of questions about what this particular painting represents. It's now called The Musicians, but that's a name that we've just given it. It wasn't given a name when it was created. It can be read in multiple ways. The most agreed upon interpretation is that the three figures on the right are allegorical figures that represent the concept of music, and the figure on the left is Cupid. Other readings say that the figures represent the senses of touch, sound, and sight, although I could never quite figure out which one is meant to be which. Perhaps the lute player is sound, the boy reading the paper is sight, not really sure. Regardless of what you think these figures are doing or what they represent, one thing is very obvious. It's sexy in a very, very homoerotic way. From what we know about his life and artworks, Caravaggio is widely understood now to have been a bisexual. And this painting is one of many works that can be read as sexually provocative and homoerotic, as well as representing the sensuality in blurring the lines between masculine and feminine. And what's most interesting to me is that Caravaggio painted himself into this picture. He's the young man second from the right at the back, who's looking directly at the viewer. It's almost, to me, like an assertion of a queer identity from a time before our modern concepts of gender and sexuality existed. All of this makes this painting very powerful, not just in a kind of sexy way, but emotionally to members of the queer community like me today. If we're going to talk about beauty, I couldn't go past this amazing portrait from the exhibition of Marie Josephine Charlotte Duval-Dogne, long name, by another Marie, who was Marie Denise Villers. May have to call them Marie 1, Marie 2, a bit confusing. In classical art history sexism, this painting was originally attributed to a man, but has more recently been reattributed to Marie Denise Villers. This is an endlessly captivating portrait that I could look at for hours. The whole painting is full of dramatic but soft contrast. The backlighting gives the subject a halo-like aura. It's exactly like when you see someone in direct sunlight from a window and their edges become all fuzzy and illuminated. It's just gorgeous. But the most intriguing and beautiful part of this painting to me is the crack in the window pane. It's a complete mystery. No one knows why it's there or what it means, but the artist clearly went to a great effort to paint it in. It would have taken quite a bit of skill to get that illusion quite right. Mysteries like this in art from the past are a reminder to us that the things that we do and the things that we make are not universally comprehensible. There's no guarantee that people in the future will understand the symbols we use today, because meaning is so easily lost over time. Finally, I'd like to talk about one of the most famous artists from history to date. You'll see his paintings on everything from tote bags to coffee mugs. This guy's really, a merch pusher, and exhibitions of his work are blockbuster attractions internationally. People froth a Van Gogh. Don't deny it, you do too. Everyone does. People love a sunflower. So why is Vincent van Gogh one of the world's favorite artists? I believe it's because his paintings have a near universal beauty to them. People love color and harmony. Essentially, we are all just toddlers at heart. We are captivated by bright and dynamic colors. This is the way this painting shows not only the greens, but the reds, the whites, the yellows, the blues of the grass. There's so many colors in that grass if you really take a close look. And then there's this blue and purple tree and the contrasting gray-white sky. There's just so much to look at, so much visual satisfaction to be felt. It's like looking in a Lego box. Now, of course, beauty is subjective, of course, but Van Gogh's work has this sort of mass appeal today, I think, for more than just their aesthetic qualities. Vincent van Gogh's artworks elicit a really strong emotional response from people because we know about his tragic life story and his struggles with mental health. After learning about the tragic end to his life, most likely at his own hand, and his immense suffering, it is amazing he produced so many vibrant and colorful works. So to summarize, what effect does classical art have on the heart and soul? Well, as these examples show, art from the past reminds us of what is important about being human and how all of our emotions are part of a shared human experience that transcends time. Whether it's connecting us with long dead people from the past, like with the Hans Holbein portrait, or how Caravaggio challenges our preconceptions about the history of queer identities, how Marie Denise Villers left us a mystery and a cracked window that we may never solve, or the universal beauty in a Van Gogh, classical art has produced some of the most beautiful and emotional images in history. And with that, I'd like to pass back to Aimon.
Thank you, Mary. I actually did watch a documentary on Vincent van Gogh. I was just remembering, you might be surprised to learn that he at one point fought invisible aliens. And that might have been an episode of Doctor Who now that I think about it. I'll keep thinking about that. But now let's hear from Dr. Louise Mayhew, another Doctor Who, in a sense, arguing for the side of the contemporary. Can she convince you that it is in fact contemporary art that should win your heart? Please take it away, Louise.
Thank you, Aimon. I would also like to start by acknowledging the Yagara and the Turrbal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land where I live and work, and to acknowledge the incredible next generation of First Nation artists who are coming through and doing such amazing, incredible things. So that was a very beautiful and convincing round, and I have an exceptionally hard task ahead of me with only 17% of you on my side so far. Nevertheless, I love contemporary so much that I hope with my passion that I can share with you some of the dazzling world of contemporary art and convince you of the emotional pleasure of the works of beauty, the sublime, utopia, and enchantment being made right now. So in Queensland Art Gallery's Watermall, this spectacular sculpture hangs above the water. It lures us to its shimmery surface. This is a destination artwork. Visitors flock to marvel at its glow and to take photos underneath its shimmer. The artist Ai Weiwei made this work especially for this space, just as he was on the cusp of international fame, and he then very generously donated it to Queensland Art Gallery. It takes the shape of a boomerang, the traditional Indigenous throwing tool, and transforms it through materials and scales into a stunning waterfall chandelier. And in this transformation, Ai Weiwei is joining other contemporary artists who are also using light and sunshine. In this next slide, you might have seen some of these other shining, immersive artworks. All of them produce wonder and delight. This work is also drawing on the symbolism and history of the chandelier, which dates back to the medieval era and came to be associated with luxury, wealth, and elegance in 18th century Venice, which was when royalty would fill their palaces with the ethereal glow of chandeliers. Boomerang continues in this breathtaking indulgence. It's an absolutely massive chandelier, 8 meters wide and 7 concentric tiers of boomerang shapes down. And it sparkles with 270,000 crystal beads. Why are we so drawn to this work? Well, an associate professor of lighting, Wendy Davis, explains that chandeliers are timeless precisely because they are excessive. Standing in their presence allows us to revel in a dramatic moment of grandeur. Boomerang is a contemporary manifestation of the ostentatiousness, opulence, and splendor of the Rococo. It reminds me of the Palace of Versailles and its Hall of Mirrors. But that's in France, and I'm not going there anytime soon. That place is also ticketed and has very long queues. Ai Weiwei's work is here in Brisbane and in art-loving places around the world. It's free and there's no queues. So if contemporary art is just like classical art in that it can be beautiful, what else can it do that maybe classical art can't? Let me share with you Quantum Memories. This is an epic new media work made by Refik Anadol. It uses images from the internet, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing to create a moving, thinking painting. This work is so outrageously mesmerizing that even a critic who hated it wrote about it in these evocative terms. Authorless yet vociferous, overpowering yet soothing, maximal yet entrancing. Quantum Memories is inspired by abstract expressionism. If we have a look at Quantum Memories next to this work by Lee Krasner's painting, we'll see that both ripple, toss and turn with wave-like forms, and both use the brilliant color of sunsets. But what is it like to stand in front of this work? What experience does it evoke? Well, the Enlightenment thinker, Immanuel Kant, described beauty as an easy pleasure. It's straightforward and reassuring. By contrast, he defined the sublime as a complex and far more satisfying pleasure, provoked by experiences that are too great for comprehension. Anadol's work is an example. It combines more than 200 million digital images of nature. The artist has described it as a vision of every forest, every ocean, and every cloud on Earth. And in this sense, it reminds me of other sublime artworks, like the light of spectra, which stretches 2 miles into the night sky, or this stunning work, Echo and Abyss, which captures the vastness of the land. Now, Kant specifically said that art cannot produce sublime experiences, but he died a few hundred years ago. Contemporary art is complex, it's unfathomable, it's intensely pleasurable. And if he lived today, Kant would say that contemporary art is sublime. Let's move now to the world of utopia. And I have a question for you, so wriggle up to your keyboards. The average person spends only 27 seconds with a work of art. This work by Nat Randall and Anna Brecken runs for 24 hours. Audiences are welcome to come and go as they please. So, what's my question? How long do you think I stayed with this work? Have a guess and I'll reveal my answer shortly. So for 24 hours, Randall repeated the same breakup scene with 100 different men. In every scene, a man entered the set with takeaway dinner, the two ate, they chatted, Nat drunkenly dances, they fight, and then the man exits the stage. But at the door, he can choose to say, I will always love you, or I never loved you. Some of the men giggled, some mumbled, some went off script, yet no matter how sweet or chaotic they were, when they reached the end of the scene, you desperately wished for them to profess their love. This work reminds me of Marina Abramovic. For 8 hours a day, Abramovic invited audiences to sit silently across from her and look into her eyes. Both of these works draw on the power of being in the presence of an artist. Both use a deceptively simple format to lure us into waiting and watching for epic time periods. But most importantly, these works aren't only about what happens on the stage or in the chair. They're about the conversations that we have with other art lovers. When Randall finished each scene, the lights dimmed, conversation erupted. People literally twisted in their seats to eagerly exchange stories and opinions with each other. Like endurance athletes, we bragged about how far we'd traveled and how long we had stayed. The static paintings and sculptures of yesteryear have no knowledge of who stands in front of them. They're frozen and mute. But by contrast, contemporary art comes to life through its audience. The French curator Nicolas Bourriaud explains that contemporary art prioritizes relationships. It leads us into joy-filled experiences and conversations. And in this conversation, he says, we create utopia. So how long do you think I stayed in this utopian space? I've seen some pretty good guesses. 13 hours. And I only left because I had a plane to catch. Now let's move out of the gallery and fall in love with the world. A raging event of continual noise, the sun, version 2, is a spectacular exploding smoke bomb of dreamy colours and even dreamier shapes. Emily Parsons Lord created this performance work for Iceland's List í Ljósi festival, which marks the end of winter's darkness and celebrates the coming glow of summer. It's part of her investigation of the solar system, and it recreates the colours of the sun. Watching Parson Lord's performances is like watching fireworks. They're joyous, public, collective, and they're steeped in this nostalgia for the present, knowing that this perfect moment of beauty and wonder will all be over soon. Her work reminds me of the joy and faith of Yves Klein, a French artist who famously believed in flight and leapt into the void. His photograph, like Emily's work, is full of magic. The art critic Susie Gablick says that in our world of capitalism, consumerism, and cynicism, art plays a special role of re-enchantment. She says that fresh, communal, revitalized art can generate feelings of the greatest pleasure and delight, as if they have cast us under their spell of magic. So yes, the art of antiquity is beautiful and it's significant, but contemporary art is enchanting. It's utopian and sublime. Thanks, Aimon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Louise. Oh, you actually used a word that I've definitely heard before, but I couldn't place what it means, rococo.
Oh, I feel like that's one for Mary to answer, but Rococo is a time period. Okay. So if we think of King Louis and his kind of palaces of opulence, then we're thinking of the Rococo. So very, very excessive artworks that celebrate wealth and decoration.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, the whole time I was like, why have I heard that word before? But yes, thank you. This has all been so fascinating, and you've both so beautifully articulated your points, and the chat is in complete agreement with that too. But we've got a lot of undecided swing voters, so let's get straight into round 2 and see which art, classical or contemporary, will win over the minds of you intelligent and insightful folks. So Mary, back over to you.
Thank you, Aimon. Wow, Louise, you're really bringing out the big guns here. Hard to follow that one. First up, okay, you might think after Louise's amazingly articulated argument that all of the innovation and excitement is to be found in the contemporary art world. But I'm here to tell you that that's not quite the case. Every age has its own amazing shifts and changes and deep intellectual challenges. And when it comes to art, I think the following examples will show you just how impressive the skills and concepts of the artists from the past were. Let's start with this amazing painting from the Dutch Golden Age. And as a side note, you know it was a good time when we retrospectively call it a golden age. This is obviously a very impressive, technically impressive painting. The detail and hyper-realism is a testament to the incredible skill of this artist. Each one of these objects looks so real, it's almost like you could reach out and touch them. Or maybe they'd reach out and touch you, especially this overturned inkwell, which is the black cylinder in the bottom left corner. It's actually an inkwell, which is painted to look like it's protruding over the edge of the ledge that these objects are sitting on. It feels like it's coming out of the canvas almost. And this is what we call a trompe-l'oeil, a trick of the eye. I also love the reflection of the window pane in the glass on the right-hand side. If you can see the little sort of classic square window reflected twice there, it really makes you think about the kind of room that this was painted in. the kind of room that the artist was sitting in when he decided to add that little detail. But there's more than just clever illusions going on here. This type of painting is actually called a vanitas, or a memento mori. Its purpose is to remind the viewer, that's usually the person who commissioned and owned the painting and had kept it in their house. Its purpose is to remind that person of their mortality. The skull in this picture is the most obvious symbol of death. I'm sure you've all picked up on that one. But also the snuffed out lantern in the top left corner represents a life suddenly over. I think in our society today, we're a little bit afraid of thinking and talking about death. We avoid thinking about it because we think that bringing up death too much will make us unhappy. But the Netherlands in the 17th century, the Dutch Golden Age, they wanted to put it at the front of people's minds because it was important to their Calvinist Christian faith. They believed that thinking about your own death would put things into perspective a bit and help you live a better life. And of course, help you be a better Christian. This painting is basically a reminder to stay humble because one day it'll all be over. Paintings like this are great at showing us how classical art can teach us a new perspective on our own individual personal lives. But what about broader social issues? This next artwork, if we can change slide, thank you, is an example of how we can use old art to help us investigate issues that are important to us today, especially issues, really important issues like gender, class, and politics. This is a very, very elegant portrait of the Comtesse de la Chartre wearing a fantastic hat, I really want one of these, by a female painter from the 18th century called Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun. They're all French, if you couldn't tell by my sort of dodgy accent there. Now, most women artists in history from the classical art period have struggled to be recognized by the art world or remembered by history, as that history was usually written by men. But Vigée-Lebrun is one of the outliers. Although she was excluded from art school when she was young, when she first wanted to go to art school, she did eventually join the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture in France, and she went on to have a very successful career as a portraitist. But before you get all overexcited and call Vigée-Lebrun a feminist icon of art history, it's important to remember that she was an incredibly privileged woman. Vigée-Lebrun was actually a close personal friend of Marie Antoinette, and she painted several pieces of art propaganda for the monarchy in the lead up to the French Revolution. She ended up fleeing France in 1789 for her own safety, and only returned years later when her personal safety could be guaranteed, because basically the revolutionaries saw her as a target because she was a member of the upper class. Vigée-Lebrun raises important questions about the intersections between gender and class in the art world. Just because she had a successful career as an artist doesn't mean that this was an option for other women in her time. The same way that today it's more often white, wealthy women who experience the benefits of feminism before other groups do. On the topic of class, let's take a look at a far more grim and dingy painting, also from France, but from a century later. Ah yes, the third-class carriage, almost like flying economy. It's hard for us to understand today, but the invention of train travel completely revolutionized life in Europe in the 19th century. Working class people were no longer stuck in one place. This is kind of hard for us to wrap our heads around, but you no longer needed a horse or a horse and cart to travel around the country. You could do it by train, completely mind-blowing. On one hand, this meant more freedom for the working class and the ability to migrate to different places for work. But on the other hand, it aided rapid industrialization in Europe, leading to hundreds of thousands of people flocking to overcrowded cities to work in factories in very, very poor conditions. Just think Charles Dickens, the workhouses, the lot. This painting is by French realist painter Honoré Daumier. and it shows the interior of the cheapest carriage in the train, the third-class carriage. It's dark, it's grotty, the people look pretty tired and overworked. The realists were interested, that's realist with a capital R, by the way, were interested in showing the lives of the majority, which was a pretty radical approach when the art world had traditionally been a space for the rich and powerful, just as we saw before with Vigée-Lebrun's portraiture. This painting shows the grim reality of the working class at all stages of life, shown with the four people in the foreground: infancy, childhood, motherhood, and old age. It's pretty obvious that the lives of the two women in this painting would have been very, very different from the life of the Countess Marie from the previous painting we looked at. But not all art from history is revolutionary. In fact, the vast majority of it is very mainstream. It follows the trends and styles of its era and doesn't seek to challenge them. This next painting may not be a unique or groundbreaking image, nor was it a revolutionary subject for 15th century Italy. It is, after all, yet another painting of the crucifixion. Can we please have the next slide, please? Thank you. It's another painting of the crucifixion, surprise, with a bunch of saints, a smattering of angels, and a very, very, very large amount of gold leaf. Classic. Also, one of my favorite periods of art history. So I felt like I should wrap it up with this piece. The attribution of this painting is disputed, but most experts agree that it was most likely painted by Fra Angelico, although, you know, it's up for debate. But in a way, it doesn't really matter who created it. When it comes to history, we like to look at the outliers and the radicals to understand the past. However, it's more often the mainstream that actually defines an era and that means the most to people in that time. For medieval and Renaissance art, repeated themes and common subject matter was not seen as unoriginality, but as an important part of devotional practice. In other words, people would paint the same scenes from the Bible over and over and over again as a way to share the stories with other people and as a way to express what was important to them. I like to think of pictures like this as the pop culture of their day. The most important thing to remember about the ideas and concepts behind classical art is that it's not any more fancy or important than today's blockbuster movies or internet memes, which is why I like to say that art history is just old memes. So I'll hand back to Aimon, but I hope that I've convinced you of the intellectual stimulus and the meaning to society that classical art has.
Thank you, Mary. It's very well said. And yes, I agree that the Rococo style of those paintings I just learned a new word. I'm already not using it correctly.
Nice job.
Let's hear from Louise. Please take to the screen and tell us why you think that contemporary art appeals to the mind.
Thank you, Aimon. I must admit, I do absolutely love to death that Fra Angelico. Okay, so in round one, I shared with you an art that engages in pleasure and magic. But it's round two, and it's time to get to work. The following works champion art as protest, art as repair, art as activism, and art as Holy Communion. For 2 years, Kate Just knitted the title of her work, Anonymous Was a Woman, into colourful squares. This work is about art history. It attends to whose work is celebrated by arts institutions and whose work has been overlooked and forgotten. We've already experienced a biting example of this tonight from Mary in round one, when she shared with us a painting by the female artist, Marie Denise Villers, that was long attributed to the male artist, Jacques-Louis David. To make her powerful critique, Kate Just cleverly draws on strategies and aesthetics of germinal artists from the past 100 years. Let me break these down for you. So first of all, from modernism, she is borrowing from Mondrian, especially his grid, which we'll see in a moment. Mondrian believed that an art practice of horizontal and vertical lines could literally transform the world. He believed that straightness and up and downness would bring peace to earth by putting everything in order. From craft, just is borrowing the intertwined histories of feminine and feminist practice. For centuries, women's domestic needlework, their knitting and their sewing, has been the undersung sibling of men's painting and sculpture. But in the 1970s, feminist artists toppled this hierarchy. They celebrated the small and the domestic, the pastel and the pink, the textile and the tactile. And of course, from the Guerrilla Girls, just continues the work of art as protest. Those art world renegades criticized art galleries, especially the Met, for their unbalanced collections, which prioritize white male artists to the detriment of a bigger, more complex, and more enlightening art history. Just brings all of these histories together as she knits in public, on the tram, in cafes, in galleries, and has conversations with everyday and unsuspecting audiences on art, gender, and labor. Her finished work is 140 panels. It required 3,500 hours knitting and is made of 2 million stitches. This work is a labor of love and an epic work of protest, and it's dedicated to the women throughout history whose creative work and artistic prowess has gone unnamed. From protest, let's move to repair. In the depths of museum archives, human bones and life casts tell the shameful history of colonial conquest. They hold pillaged sacred objects and record the racist pseudoscience of phrenology, which attempted to rank the intelligence and morality of different races according to the proportions of one's face. Maori Scottish photographer Fiona Partington sits with these dehumanizing objects, and she waits for them to feel alive in the sunlight of the day before she photographs them. This photograph captures one of 50 19th century life casts made by the French anatomist Pierre-Marie Alexandre Dumoutier. Ileana, I hope you're proud of me. Hung in a gallery at larger than life size, Partington's reparative approach restores life to her sitters. Via her photographs, this young Maori man appears serene and relaxed and profoundly handsome. Partington's tenderness enables us, the viewers, to sit with these complex and difficult histories of the colonial museum and its objects. Art theorist Professor Susan Best describes this as reparative. This is art that fixes, mends, and heals. And for me, this calls to mind Michelle Vine's Affirmation Bathtub. This participatory installation begins with the generous invitation to remove your shoes, climb in, headphones on, sink deep, listen, and be affirmed, relax. Lying in this cozy, fur-lined bathtub, audiences are treated to a soothing, meditative soundtrack and words that whisper in your ears. You are beautiful, magnificent, brave, sexy, vulnerable, and strong. The artist evocatively describes this work as healing, both for herself and for her audience. Contemporary art like this is a salve. It tends to our wounds and our heartbreak with a tenderness that is just for us, that's full of love and hope. Now that we have relaxed and healed, it's time for action. The term invasive species refers to flora and fauna that have spread beyond their native habitat due to human action. In Australia, we have wild rabbits, feral pigs, foxes, and those absolutely revolting things, cane toads, that wreak havoc on the landscape, killing native animals and destroying farmers' crops. Invasive weed management alone costs Australia a staggering $4 billion a year. But if cane toads are lemons, then Kirsha Kashela is the mastermind behind the world's most spectacular lemonade stand. This work presents a veritable cornucopia of food and drinks, all made from dangerous and damaging invasive species. In other words, the artist compels us to fix the problem of invasive species as we eat the problem. This is what is called in the art world a Gesamtkunstwerk, a fantastic word that means a total work of art or work with many parts. It's a spectacular, immersive dinner party that combines Bauhaus design, contemporary art's love for collectivity, an entrepreneur's can-do spirit, master chef's love for gastronomy, and the eco-activism of Greta Thunberg and Al Gore. This work is also a cookbook. So again, it moves beyond the gallery and this time into our kitchens, where it facilitates thoughtful, ethical, and productive eating habits. And this tangible problem-solving ethic of the work reminds me of Joseph Beuys's pioneering land art. This massive and enduring artwork involves planting 7,000 oak trees in the German town of Kassel, literally transforming this urban concrete city into a place of greenery, shade, and oxygen. The artist chose the oak tree for its ancient and sacred connections to Druids, and he thought of this work as a living sculpture. 5 years after the planting began, and on the first anniversary of Beuys's death, his son planted the final tree. Art historian T.J. Davis argues that climate justice and eco-activism are the most urgent issues of our lives that artists must address. These artists heed his words. They use art as a vehicle for tangible social good, and they work pragmatically toward a vibrant future for us all. Now, the work that we have seen so far of protests, of repair, and activism needs to be for everyone. And tonight's final artwork is so incredibly fantastic at welcoming us all. Creation by Deborah Kelly and collaborators is a new religion of spectacle and intimacy, pleasure and possibility. And at its heart is an 8-part sacred liturgy written by S.J. Norman. I'd like to read to you an extract from part 1, which are on these exceptionally beautiful cards. For those who have known thirst, we drink. For those who have known starvation, we feast. For those who have known only winter, we warm ourselves. For those who have known only labor, we rest. For those who have known deprivation, we offer our delight. For those who have offered theft, we move to restore that which has been stolen. For those who have known confinement, we commit to the work of liberation. This is a radical and emotional text. It combines the transcendental sacredness of religious practice with mourning deeply for the harm that humans have caused to one another. It awakens my soul and fills my heart to bursting, and it has made me cry again and again. From this liturgy, creation swells into a multifaceted work of faith. It's filled with digitized dancing bodies, exquisite tapestries, ceremonial songs, and poetic costumes. And across all of this celebratory imagery, creation champions inclusive collectivity, fervent climate action, reparative justice, and transcendental love. The pop artist and AIDS activist Keith Haring said, "Art is nothing if we don't reach every segment of the people." Deborah Kelly and her collaborators join a global community of creatives making inclusive art for diverse audiences. And we see here on the next slide just the tiniest selection of these other contemporary artists around the world making incredible, beautiful, inclusive art. This is only the tiniest selection. To find more, I urge you to seek out contemporary art. It's there, waiting for you.
Thank you, Louise, and to Mary for those very compelling and beautifully articulated arguments. I'm so inspired by both of your passion for art, as I can tell our attendees are too. And I can't wait to learn more. Attendees, have you decided who will get your vote? Let us know in the chat where you are standing, but don't commit just yet. Each speaker gets one more chance to sway you with their closing argument. Also, shout out to Anna for one of my favorite comments so far. I do enjoy Fra Jellicoe on ice. I love it. Here's Mary for classical art.
Wow, I definitely teared up there at the end, Louise. You really got me. This is such a tough one, especially with your inclusion of Kate Just and Deborah Kelly, two of my favorite contemporary artists working today. Their work is incredible. This is very hard to argue, I have to admit. But I do want to acknowledge that all of these incredible artworks Louise has talked about are amazing. They break the mold on what people think art can be. They're challenging. But I'd also like to remind us all that there would be no mold to break and no mold to reject if it weren't for our shared history of centuries and centuries of art history. I think almost every single artwork that Louise talked about referenced something from the past, whether it was Ai Weiwei's referencing of Rococo chandeliers, or Deborah Kelly's amazing collage work using elements of old paintings and repurposing them in a contemporary context. None of that would be possible without our rich history of classical art. There's so much to learn from art from the past that helps us gain a perspective on the present, both emotionally and intellectually. Most of these artworks that I've spoken about this evening were made before the modern idea of an art gallery even existed. And that's hard to wrap your head around. And forgive me, Queensland Art Gallery, for saying this, but to me, there's so much more that can be learned about a society than you can learn solely from its gallery exhibited artworks. And I'm sorry to any artists who are watching this evening. The artworks I've talked about this evening were originally made for a wide variety of purposes. There's devotional artworks like the Fra Angelico, which was made for private prayer, for public prayer, for group prayer, to convey religious messages, not to hang in an art gallery, although that's where it's ended up. For personal purposes, like the skull Vanitas, which was to personally remind people to stay humble and to think about their own mortality, Or Vigée Lebrun's portraits. All of her portraiture was often made for private homes, to give to a loved one, to commemorate a loved one, or, you know, to bolster your own status within certain families or political contexts, or even personal expression. Van Gogh himself couldn't sell, I don't think, any artworks while he was alive. His artworks didn't really make it to galleries when he was alive, but he did it just for the pure joy of expressing himself, and he kept trying regardless. If you want to learn about a society, the art hanging in an art gallery is only the tip of the iceberg for images that show what people find important. If I wanted to know about our society today, if I was an alien, I would be looking at movies and TV shows, billboard ads, the photos that people post and share on Instagram, not just gallery art, although that's really important as well. The amazing thing about art history and classical art is the further back you go, the more things, the wider the net is for what is counted as art. If you're looking at medieval art, you get to not only look at paintings, but the frescoes on people's walls, dresses and tapestries people wore and made their beds with, and the pottery people used every day of their lives. One day, the contemporary art of today will be history too, and it will be studied alongside the rest of our visual culture, the movies, the TV shows, the ads, and all of your Instagram photos. I always like to say, of course, my tagline is that art history is just old memes, and I really, really believe that. A meme is a story or a joke that people remix and repeat and share with each other over time. Just like memes, art from the past has always been a way to share ideas and express our values to each other. And I believe in order to understand the present, it's essential we understand and reflect on the past.
Thank you, Mary. I agree. Classical art is an amazing link with the past, but I do disagree with you, though, that my Instagram posts will be art in the future. My Instagram is absolute rubbish.
I'll make sure, I'll put them in the history books, and I'll make sure they are.
Don't punish future generations with that. And last but certainly not least is Louise with her closing statements for contemporary art. Please take it away, Louise.
Thanks, Aimon. So 100 years ago, the Italian futurists declared that we should burn our libraries, tear down our galleries, and desecrate museums. They called these institutions mausoleums to the past, filled with dead and dying things. I love art history, so you won't find me heading to the city centre with a pitchfork and a torch, but I understand their point. We spend too much time looking backwards and at a very narrow canon of white, rich dudes. Every generation before us has repeated this error. They didn't cherish Van Gogh when he was alive. He died depressed and penniless. Even Frida Kahlo only had one solo exhibition during her lifetime. I could rattle off countless others: El Greco, Vermeer, Hilma af Klint, Modigliani, Toulouse-Lautrec, Gauguin, Ren Hang. All of them became famous after their death. Let's not repeat the mistakes of the past. These are the artists of our generation. Let's have a look at their gorgeous faces. Here they are. They live among us. They spend their lives making our world better through new forms of beauty, sublime experiences, contemporary utopias, and re-enchanting magic. They work hard, intelligently engaging with the problems of art history, carefully mending the pains of the past, tangibly addressing the ills of the present, and dreaming new sacred possibilities for the future. I love art history and I love contemporary art, but most of all, I love artists. let's cherish them here and now.
Thank you, Louise. I feel so much more cultured. I'm pretty much a yogurt at this point. Oh, I regretted saying that straight away. That was weird. Now, the time has come to vote for our winner via the on-screen vote. So who won over your hearts and minds? Who loves the awe-inspiring old masters? How about those of you who prefer the thought-provoking brilliance of contemporary artists? Simply click on your fave on the screen there and let the voting begin. Look at that. Look how close it was. Classical is at 46% and contemporary is at 60%. I'm not sure how that worked out with some percentages, but 46% for classical and 60% for contemporary. Contemporary up from 17% to 60%. Wow. Thank you so much to Louise, Dr. Mayhem Mayhew, and Mary the Art Killer McGillivray for that inspiring and incredibly entertaining debate.